Welcome to Nightlight. Step away from the mainstream and gather around as we enlighten the world and our realities and travel this cosmic journey we call life. Join us as we share with you and provide that beacon that can guide us all to a better way. Explore with us as we examine a metaphysical montage of spiritual insights covering everything from the mundane to the magical, UFOs to unicorns, and everything in between. This is a time of awakening, of sharing and evolving, of spreading our wings and soaring on the cosmic breath of creation. Come and join with other light-minded spirits as we weave our lights together to seek understanding, enlightenment, and with a little luck, some wisdom. This is Nightlight, a reminder that you are never alone.
Hey everyone. I hope everyone is adjusting to the extra hour of gloom and doom. Hope they're doing a better job adjusting to it than I did with the StreamYard link a couple minutes before the show started. But anyhow, we got that fixed. So I already can't wait for May to get here. After only a few weeks since his appearance with Barbara, he's back. TYRONE Ellington is returning with new discussions on his well-done autobiography, ancient history, UFO study, outer body experience. Kind of get a little bit of everything with Tyrone's book. It's actually very well done. His book is titled Journey Through the Origins of Time. His website is rebirthoftheword.com. And he likes history so much that when I called to check in with him this afternoon, before I screwed up the StreamYard link, he was actually coming home from a museum. So hi Tyrone, how you doing?
Good. I just wanted to say it was Journey Through the Origins of History.
Oh boy, I screwed that up. Yeah. Made another mistake. Okay, history. Okay, all right, so what were you doing at the museum this afternoon?
No, I was just basically going back over there to do a video of the location. I created a Rumble account under Rebirth of the Word, and it's just basically places that I've been to that's around the Americas, or places I've been to, period, that's historical or something that has something to do with my interest as far as historic sites or battlegrounds or something like that. And I just went there to do a video because I've already did an article on it a couple of months back, but I just recently just started this Rumble account where I wanted to show people, the visual of it instead of just pictures and words. I wanted to get it more personal so they can see what I'm seeing at the moment. And it's more of a on the spot recording. It's nothing that's really planned. I don't go there to say, hey, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. It's just more natural. I'm going there talking and taking pictures and recording different things, and trying to basically give, and not everybody has the opportunity to go to these museums and see them and stuff like that. And because the history world is so saturated with different historians and everybody's trying to get their point across, I just wanted to create a space where people can go and just say, okay, hey, I might be able to go to Georgia one day, and I might be able to go to these museums, and this is what I would like to see and what I wouldn't want to see. Almost like a review almost. but more of just I guess a recording and just of what I've done since I've adding just things I wanted to add to my resume, basically, because I've already wrote a book, I already have a website, I already have a YouTube channel where I do interviews with different people and stuff like that. So I wanted to have something where it's just me personally, just boots on ground and going to different places and visiting them.
Cool. Okay. We have lots of stuff to see in Georgia. Okay. So a uh common denominator to this show is that our buddy Ken Godsword is the publisher of Tyrone's book. I'm sure the viewers remember the show from last month, and then
Mhm.
Ken and Barbara wrote this one. Really neat
That's
book.
actually a really good one right there. That
Yeah,
Before Roswell, I like that one right there.
yeah. And then there's all the uh, Ken's solo book on translating the tablets, like Sumerian tablets, and it gets into all kinds of really interesting uh, sci-fi stuff. We'll be talking about that in a little bit too. Then Ken did my book, and then really
Yeah, I
appreciate
love your
Tyrone.
book too, because I
Yeah,
definitely want to go there and see some of the places that you talked about in that book.
yeah. Come on up. So there, Tyrone endorsed the book, and really appreciate that too. So and Joey Medea is on the bottom of the book, or the bottom of the page there. He's been a regular with us. He was just on about a month ago. Uh, Ken also publishes Wallace Wagner, Jim Willis, who recently passed away, but he's been a guest with us a couple times. So there's Ken's uh, this person that's pulled us all uh, together, and I think he's doing a great job with his publishing company. Um, let's see. So, okay, so we got some of those plugs out of the way, and so let's talk a little bit about your book, Journey Through the Origins of History. And you uh, place Sumeria in uh, an exalted category of culture, place where so many like cultural evolution and just kind of radiated out from it. But you saw some of its legacy while you were serving in the army. So, can you tell us a little bit about how being in the Near East figures into your book?
Yeah, well, basically because the Bible comes close from that area. You got the Sumerians, who are considered the first civilization because of their writing system. It was interesting that I got to serve in Iraq and got to see, the city life, and then, the outside life, the people that lived outside the city. When I was there, you know, before I went there, actually, you hear all these rumors about how Iraq was and how it was ran and the dictatorship and so on and so forth. And then when I went there in the beginning of the war, there were places that didn't seem like anything like was in the news. And being here in America, we always show the good cities, the high life and stuff like that, but they don't show you the rundown parts and stuff like that. And here in America, we have places that are, almost third world looking, right? You have some places in Michigan that have, dirty water. And then, back in the 90s, New York had trash everywhere. And, certain mayors had to try to clean that up. And then you have, certain crime rates in different cities and stuff like that. So, you know, we based our, or I should say, I can say, I based my opinion based off what other people said, right? Without, going there and seeing it for myself and experiencing it for myself. So when I went there, you see the same type of stuff. You'll see people, living very luxurious out there. They have luxury out there just like we do here. Um, they have beautiful cities, roads. You can't tell the difference. Well, when I went to this one place called The Hook, um, it was beautiful. I mean, you couldn't even tell that you was in a foreign country. That's how nice it was. And there was a lot of people that was there who could speak English, and there were people from different places like uh, Sweden. I met a couple of people from Sweden there, so that was kind of interesting. And people were just walking around happy. And this was in the middle of the war while I was full geared out, Kevlar, flak vest, rifle, and everything. And they're just walking around just like how we would here. And but when things started happening, of course everybody would run away and go hide and do stuff like that, but they lived their lives just like how we would live our lives here. And it was just very interesting because um I was actually just telling my wife today about this, uh, and this is kind of not really political, but when I was there, I didn't see too many people praying, or I can tell you, I didn't see nobody praying at all in the middle of the streets like how they do here in different countries and stuff like that, in the UK and here in America and stuff like that. So I was, seeing how they're very religious and how their religion can have them do different things, different places, opened up my eyes, and it still does even to this day, even though I haven't been there, since then. And just knowing that the people live their lives just like how we lived ours is very amazing. They have museums, they used money just like we used money. They had markets and stuff like that. And then when you go to the outside, the people that didn't live in the cities, they were living like almost like they was in ancient times. They had what we would quote and say like mud huts. They would create their homes out of clay and mud and stuff like that. And then some people had tents. They were living in tents, and they had a treasure case, I guess you could say a chest of all their valuable stuff in there, including, if they had something for, blankets and pillows and clothes and stuff like that. And they would move according to whatever the weather was like. So they would
So,
set up in one place, and then later on they would set up somewhere else if they need be.
so there's like modern day nomadic people.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Almost exactly like that. They had the bare minimum, and they would only move when they needed to. I mean, there was times when I would go, I'm gonna say 2-3 hours outside the city in the middle of the desert somewhere. And when I say literally middle of the desert, I mean literally middle in the desert. And it would be some kind of, I would say like a pond or some kind of water reservoir somewhere that they stayed nearby, and they wouldn't go too far away from that. And if they did go far away from that, they went towards the mountains, which sometimes I didn't really understand, because a lot of times a lot of people did live in the mountains around that area, especially in Afghanistan. Actually, in Afghanistan, they lived a lot of people lived in the mountains. So they almost lived the same way up with, modern clothes, because there was times when we would get into firefights, and people and the guys that were shooting at us would have jerseys on and sneakers on. So, they had a certain lifestyle that, wouldn't be what we would call normal here, but they still did things in the basic way. Their lifestyle was very basic.
So what was that? What you were encountering? Had the culture really changed that much in thousands of years?
I don't think it really changed. I think it just adapted to what
Adapt.
modern times gave them, because they would have cell phones. They actually had satellites for their whatever entertainment they were using at that time. So I think it mostly just adapted to as close as it could to modern times without overstepping their beliefs from the past.
Okay, so there was a balance there.
Yeah.
Okay. Um, you know, maybe with a comment like that, it sounds like like with the uh, technology uh, that you were just referencing. It kind of goes back to what's in some of the sci-fi themes about creation,
Hmm.
and you cover that as well when Journey Through the Origins of History. Um, eh, and what you and Ken discuss almost seems like it's foreshadowing, presaging some of the modern scientific theories. Um, w- did, does these like sci-fi theme advanced culture does that all fit in with what interested you about you know you know the Near East, Mesopotamia, Sumeria? The, it seems like there's something, a consistent theme throughout um the culture is it's actually pretty advanced.
Yeah. 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 You know, I've always been fascinated with aliens and UFOs ever since I was a little kid. I got fascinated when I learned about Betty and Barney Hill, the alien abduction, the famous case about them.
Hmm.
And then what happened in March 13, 1997, if I'm not mistaken, on that date about the Phoenix Lights. I seen that on TV myself.
Hmm.
And so and it was, different things like what's that movie Fire in the Sky with Travis Walton, watching that actually
Hmm.
scared the hell out of me when I was when I was young.
Yeah, he has a
But
compelling story.
yeah, yeah. And so I've always been fascinated. Then knowing scientifically, or at least I can say mathematically, I can't say scientifically because we haven't really proven it yet, but mathematically, they say that there are billions of planets out there and possibly galaxies and so on and so forth. So if that's true, and I'm the type of person that believes in the 1% rule, there's always going to be a 1% rule, whether no
Hmm.
matter what it is, there's always going to be a 1%. And that 1% doesn't mean that there's going to be one other thing. That 1%, it could be many things, but in a small amount. So it could be like maybe 3 or 4 planets out of a billion or 100 or whatever. However you want to calculate that mathematically, there's going to be a couple of other things out there. So I believe that there was life outside of Earth. I believe that there's something existed other than us. Um, but in my book, I wanted to figure out what was the criteria that people would consider what would be human, because the idea is there humans on other planets? Well, what would be the criteria for humans? And and anatomically, we would be, you know, the head, the arms, the legs, the 2 feet, and so on and so forth. But that doesn't mean that on a different planet there could be 3 arms or 4 legs or whatever, right?
Hmm.
What do you consider human? What makes us humans? A big question for a lot of people. Is it our consciousness? Is it our soul? Is it our, how our bodies are? There's so many theories on that. So I've always been fascinated with life outside of Earth's atmosphere, but I wanted to make sure that I understood what the ancient text was saying and referencing to that. Um, Most people who follow ancient aliens and you know extraterrestrials and stuff like that, they're very familiar with the show Ancient Aliens, and they're familiar with Zachariah Sitchin and Eric von Daniken. Well, when I read Eric von Daniken's book uh, Chariots of the Gods, I was fascinated because it wasn't a book about talking about that there's life outside of Earth. He was asking questions, is it possible that there's life outside of Earth? And he came up with that question because of, different scenarios that was written in the Bible. I give a good example. He talks about the Ezekiel wheel. Well, in the Bible, we know about the Ezekiel wheel, and we know that, the idea that this wheel inside of a wheel came outside of the sky. Well, I wanted to understand, when did he see this craft, or what people would consider a craft?
Yeah,
When you read the Bible,
what was it?
yeah, exactly. But when you read the Bible, no matter what version, if you read it from the beginning of the chapter, he's describing a vision. Well, a long time ago, my wife had always taught me to look at words and understand what the words mean. Look at the dictionaries and figure out what the definitions are. But that's not good enough for me, because what it was good for me then, but it's not good enough for me for my historical portion, because of the simple fact that each definition has been added um, to create a narrative, basically, right? What I mean by that is, when we look at the word mythology, most people will look at it as something being fake. But if you look at the etymology of it, is basically just a traditional oral story, something that's told orally. It doesn't make it fact, it doesn't make it fiction. But then later on, it turned into that. It turned into, a fiction versus fact type of thing. And you can tell by the many different, I guess you can say, definitions for that one word. I mean, you're not going to read, just one version of what what that word is implying. So I wanted to know the etymology of these words. What was these words first meant in the beginning? What did they mean by vision? So when I looked up the etymology of the word vision, I learned it was just something that was something like in a meditative state, something that is not seen with the two eyes. It could be in your sleep. It can be in a meditative state. It can be in a trance. It could even be when you're taking some type of psychedelic, right? So when they say vision in the Bible, they're not saying that he's seen it with his two eyes. They're saying it that he's seen it maybe in some type of um, internal dreamlike meditative state. So that made me realize also that there are a lot of inventors out there like Nikola Tesla who will come up with inventions after he had took a 15-minute nap or he was meditating. And we know that Nikola Tesla was very famous for meditating. And so when I learned that, I realized that, okay, maybe this Ezekiel's wheel wasn't necessarily seen with the two eyes, but it was visually seen through some type of, dreamlike state, or, deep trance, or some type of psychedelic trip.
Altered state, yeah.
Yeah, basically an altered state. It wasn't something that he looked up in the sky and said, "Oh, I seen this." It was more like, "Okay, I'm in an altered state. This is what I see." And that's what made me want to look deeper on where, the Anunnaki came from, or slash the Anuna. And that's when I look at the depictions. Okay, we all go to a museum and we look at art. We're going to look at that art differently. Yeah, there's going to be a foundation of what we basically see. If we see a house, yes, there's a house there, but what does that house represent, right? What is the how can I say the allegorical representation of a house? Could it be something like a secured place, right? Could it be somewhere where you house your family? Like, is it somewhere where family is, right? Because a house would indicate that's where usually where a family would be.
Place of refuge.
Yeah.
Love, something.
Yeah. So I had to understand that when it comes to writing and understanding and stuff like that, every writing system started with some type of pictographic script, meaning that basically what we use as emojis today. And the only way that I can understand them is understanding how those people lived back at time. A great example of that is if you look at the Hebrew letters or the Hebrew text with Aleph, Aleph, that usually meant like a cow or a bull or an ox or something like that, right? Something with horns. If it had horns or not horns, it just depended on the depiction. But in reality, when you look at the meaning of it, it was something that was a strong leader. And that was the actual representation of a god, a strong leader. And that's when I learned about, how cows and bulls and oxes and stuff like that, they can produce psychedelic mushrooms, not from, their, from anything that they do. It's just from their manure, their poop, basically. They poop on the ground and it gets on the, on the ground, and some type of mushroom grows from it. And then people would take it and eat it, and they will get into a psychedelic trip. And it's so funny that, here in America, they create some type of shot that they give to cows and stuff like that. So they can't make that special enzyme in their stomach to produce that type of mushroom anymore. And so, it's amazing to know that when you look at the actual depictions, that's when you get the better idea of what somebody's trying to say. And it's really hard to decipher because it's somebody else's language. So you have everybody is translating what they think is being said, and they don't know 100% it being true. And because a lot of people have translated these texts and it took years and years and years to do, the basics of it is still out there. And that's why, for me, when it came to extraterrestrials, I wanted to know what gave the indication that these things came from outside of Earth's atmosphere. And I can tell you, just from my personal research, like when you look at the Anunnaki, the depictions show that they came from Earth. They're representation of Earth. You got wind gods, you got water gods, you got agricultural gods. All these gods are gods here on Earth. You don't have a representation of a god outside of Earth, except when you go into the idea of, heaven. But heaven just means something in the sky. It doesn't mean something outside of it, Earth's atmosphere. But then as I got older and realized that, what's the difference between what is an extraterrestrial? Anything that's outside of Earth's atmosphere is an extraterrestrial. And since God, quote unquote, God in the Bible, created heaven and earth, he is outside of Earth's atmosphere. So that means he's extraterrestrial in the sense of that. But then he also created heaven, which means that there is another, but he resides in heaven depending on the text. So whatever, no matter how you look at it, God is an extraterrestrial. And if you look at the etymology of alien and the origins of the word alien, it really just means something foreign to us. That's all it is. So I had an idea that, okay, this obviously something is extraterrestrial, something is foreign to us. But does that mean necessarily that the Anunnaki are extraterrestrials? Not necessarily. I mean, could there be some? But yeah, absolutely. But are they actual extraterrestrial? No one knows. But we definitely do know for a fact that they are foreign to us, which will make them alien. And that's where it came into, okay, who came before the Sumerians? Because the Sumerians are only considered the first civilization because of their writing system. Remember when I talked about how I just said the criteria for humans? Well, what is the criteria needed to be considered a civilization? And that's where, a lot of people will say because of writing system, the Sumerians will be that. But the Sumerians' writing system started off as a pictographic script. This is no different, like I said earlier, about, emojis. This is hieroglyphs. And if you look at the ancient Egyptians, they have hieroglyphs that go back further than the Sumerians. But then you have the depictions of the Ubadians that inhabited the land of Sumer before the Sumerians, who have artifacts of what some people will consider reptilian-like individuals, and they have depictions of what something would look like, some type of reptilian, entering a body or leaving a body, and it is that fascinated me to the point to say, okay, look, there's something out there that we don't understand, and these people recorded things based off of the best way they can of their writing system, because back then they would just say everything orally, just like how we're talking now. We would translate, they translated their information just orally. They wouldn't write it down in a book like how we have written books. They wouldn't put it on a YouTube or a Twitter X page or a Facebook page or anything like that. They would just literally sit around and just tell these stories over and over and over again. Then, of course, after everybody had their own visual type quests and meditative states and trance states and altered states and stuff like that, the stories became more, I don't want to say exaggerated, but they became more of a personal, I guess you can say like a personal feeling of what they experienced. And nobody can tell somebody else what they've experienced. I can't tell you how you experienced astral projection. And that's when I learned, because of astral projection and lucid dreaming and stuff like that, that we have abilities of having altered states, and we can have abilities of controlling our dreams, or we can induce our meditative state where we can do things like astral projection.
Yeah, and in the essays that you incorporate towards the end of your book, you do have an example of outer body experience or astral projection, and there's a reference to the now I was trying to look up something. Now, like three things going on at one time. In 2 Corinthians 12:4, you do talk about the third heaven.
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
Yeah.
so that is Paul. Is that Paul talking? But I think you're using the same translation. I have. But I will move on to the visions. You were just talking about that. In Revelations, I have had from the Lord. I know a man in Christ who 14 years ago was caught up, whether still in the body or out of the body, I do not know. God knows, right into the third heaven, etc. Okay, and there's another reference, out of the body. The guy was caught up into paradise and heard things which must not and cannot be put into human language. Okay, so I was also trying to look up where's it's in Isaiah where there he lives above the circle of the earth. Its inhabitants look like grasshoppers. So as you were have been talking about Ezekiel's wheel and visions that might be about advanced cultures. Well, how did people, 3000 BC know that the Earth was a circle or sphere?
That's a good question. And, I actually thought about that a lot. There's this argument about flat Earth, whether Earth is flat or round. I don't have the ability, the money, or the opportunity to go outside of Earth's atmosphere and see it for myself. So what's the closest thing that I can do? Well, every day you have the moon and then you have the sun. And when I look at the moon and the sun in the sky, I see a circle. I understand what a sphere is, and not too many people understand that. But in reality, I can look at the moon, I can see it's a circle. So my best guess that I would have on what I was, if on my planet here on Earth, I would think that this planet would be a circle. Now, does that necessarily mean that is described that way in the Bible? That's kind of a hit and miss because everybody has their own, idea, and I never got to find the actual word for circle that they use in Hebrew. What I mean is that the depiction, I never got to actually see a depiction. You got, you know, I want to say from later times you get more of the more words like Greek, like we know Hebrew and Aramaic was translated into the Greek, uh, into the Greek Septuagint, and that's where you get the philosophical ideas of what the Earth is and stuff like that. And but when it comes to astral projection, I've heard that when you can master it, you can leave your body and see things that other people can't see. So you can, and I've heard people be able to travel to Mars. I've heard people travel to Venus and stuff like that. And like I said, I can't tell anybody what else they've experienced because I learned about astral projection after I was wounded in combat and I was diagnosed with sleep paralysis. So sleep paralysis is basically, if you don't know or if anybody doesn't know, is your body is still asleep and you can't move, but your mind is wide awake. And when you're in that, I want to say trance or altered state, you see things that you don't necessarily see. Like I've seen black figures out there. I've seen what some people would consider ghosts and stuff like that. And it's very scary. It can be very, very scary. The tightness of the chest. Some people say they experience what we know as succubus or incubus. I haven't experienced that. I experienced, the ghost and stuff like that. And I never got to. I haven't been able to control it where I was able to go outside of my house or let alone just the room itself. I'm in the room. I can feel myself floating. I can see my body sometimes if it's really intense. And I'm like, wow, I'm seeing my body. And that's what scares me is because I've had a near death experience and I know what it is to have a near death experience. And just to have that happen to me, it's like, wow, okay, this is serious. This is something that is not normally known. And when you talk about it, people say, well, there's no scientific study of it. Well, of course, because there's no way to, record that. But then I learned that Japan is actually created a pillow or is creating a pillow where it can record your dreams and you can watch your dreams later on. So I don't know how far they are into that, but I always say that science always catches up with our, I guess you can say, how can I say with our theories or what we're trying, like, I give you a perfect example. So when it comes to driving a car, we started off with walking, and then we started off with horses and donkeys and then carriages and so on and so forth. And then when we started driving, that's when everybody started saying, okay, hey, look, now we have a new invention of driving. So it's just all this stuff played a major part into me trying to understand what is actually going on.
Interesting. That's sleep paralysis. Kind of takes me back to that. The Henry Fuseli painting The Nightmare, and you see
Yeah, the
that.
one that is like that.
Yeah, and she had, there's like the horse kind of head
Oh, okay.
peeking out from behind the curtains, and you get the like little demon on her chest, and like she's kind of like just passed out while all this weird stuff is going on. But Well, I think it was a late 18th century uh, painting, but it kind of sounds like the artist is depicting, um, what we call uh, sleep paralysis today.
Mhm.
Uh, it,
Yep.
it's just the same. Ancient Aliens does that too. Uh, Someone to Göbekli Tepe is basically dep depicting human aspiration that we
Mhm.
call this to today, or going back that far in time. Some of the caveman drawings that Ken and Barbara depict in their uh, book, what where they analyzing something that they saw that we would deem as this today. So I just want add another example out there. How do we explain that this is a pattern that keeps repeating throughout history?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think it's because, we have to look at the religion aspect.
Hmm.
There are, right now Christianity is supposed to be, the biggest religion out there, and then, the Islamic faith comes in second, and so on and so forth. Or I should say Muslims come in second. And most Christians believe in a foundation of who Christ is. But that doesn't necessarily mean that everything in the Bible they believe. They just understand who Christ is. When I read the Bible for the first time, fully from cover to cover, back to back, page to page, the word God meant different things depending on the type of story. I'll give you a good example. When it talks about God creating humans uh, in the likeness of him or herself, right? But then when you look at the word Elohim, because you mentioned Jim Willis, who I really respect, rest in peace to him. Um, he he kind of explains it better than anybody else that I've came across. And what I mean by that is that he said, that there were multiple gods, and to understand these multiple gods, you have to understand the people who lived and worshiped those multiple gods. What I mean by that is that, like Yahweh, I've been to combat, I've been to war, so I also know that Yahweh is the God of war. So me personally, as a person who's a combat veteran, I have a much more relationship with Yahweh than I would with the God El, right? Or um Jehovah, or any of those different gods. And it's not because these gods were um or even Ishtar or Inanna, because some women who wanted to get pregnant and who were have difficulties getting pregnant in that time, they wouldn't pray to Yahweh, they would pray to Ishtar or Inanna, because she was the fertility god. And if you was in Egypt, depending on the type of god there, you would pray to a different god there. And so I learned that there was multiple different gods. And when you read the Bible, it even mentions that in so many different ways when it says God is a jealous God. Well, why would God need to be a jealous God? What would another God be able to do for other people to worship that God and not worship the jealous God? Why would God have a personality trait such as a human? And that's when I learned, that these gods had human personalities. They thought like us, they felt like us, they had the same kind of feelings that we had. They were angry, sad, happy, mad, whatever the case may be, based on, what was going on in that time frame. And that's what made me realize that if there's multiple gods, then there's also a fight for who's in power. Every God wants to be in power. Even if you're a loving God, you want to be a loving God to everybody. So you don't want to have a God of war who specializes in war, because somebody who's been to war understands that to be called the God of war, that means you have to do some crazy stuff to be considered that, because you don't want to be defeated, right? And that's your specialty. Just like anybody who's an electrician, that they have their specialty. Anybody that's a mason, that's their specialty. So putting that into the aspect of God and who God is, or which God anybody worships, is a whole nother level. And I feel like everybody needs to understand that I don't think the Bible is a monotheistic religion. I believe it's a henotheistic religion, meaning that there's one superior God, but they recognize lesser gods. And that's when I learned about, when it comes to what some people would consider angels and demons, they would be considered lesser gods. But what is a lesser god? A lesser god is only lesser to somebody who thinks they're on top, so, or in power at the time, right? So, every god can be considered a lesser god depending on where you're at, culturally. Even in Mesopotamia, you have the Sumerians, you have the Akkadians, you have the Hittites, you have the you got the Syrians, you got all these different people. The Babylonians, the Chaldeans, you got all these different people who had their own type of god and their own mighty god. And every god was considered a mighty god. Every god that I've come across seems to have some kind of creation story, whether they created a human or if they created an animal, they created, tools, they created something that was, very, very needful for humans. Now, it wasn't just one God that created us. When you read the Sumerian text for itself, there were 4 individuals who were responsible for creating humans. You have Enki, Enlil, then you have An or Anu, depending on what you want to call them, and then you had Ninhursag. And there were 4. Those were the 4 that were in charge of creating basically a human species. But then you had other individuals who contributed to it, like a god, the blood of one of the gods, the Anunnaki gods, and then you had the female goddesses, or that were, basically be a what's that word called, where a woman can have a baby for another woman?
Surrogate.
Yeah, surrogate, like surrogate. Yeah, they had surrogate type women that would, what some people would consider some type of artificial insemination or some kind of breeding, where they would carry the new humans, or what we would consider humans in those texts, to bring them to this planet. And they didn't succeed one time. It took them many times to create a perfect, what we consider perfect humans, because we're not perfect today. We still die from diseases, and we're still prone to death in so many different ways.
Except for Barbara.
Yeah, so it's really interesting to know that, when it comes to the creation of humans, it wasn't done at one simple a strike of a pen. It took a lot of trial and error. I've read in the Sumerian text that there were individuals that couldn't hold their urine. There were people who were blind. There were people who couldn't talk, who couldn't walk, who couldn't do certain things. And that just sounds like people who are born with disabilities, no different than what we see today.
Right. So since we were just talking about the polytheistic cultures, what became your interest in the monotheistic cultures? You are covering both in your book. Which one interests you the most? Are you still liking all the you were created in our image, the plural gods, and That's a very interesting topic.
Yeah, I studied a lot. I studied the Bible a lot. I studied it in the ancient Hebrew. I studied it in the Aramaic form, not necessarily reading it in its translation, but or in its original translation, but studying it in the English word that is translated where I can read it and understand it. And one of my questions was, who did Abraham worship from the Anuna/Anunnaki? Now, no matter what anybody's belief is about them coming from planet Nibiru or whether they came from the depths of the sea or anything like that, the Anuna/Anunnaki is absolutely real according to the Sumerians. They actually have cuneiform tablets that talks about them. There's no denying it. They are considered, individuals who created humans. This is actually in the text. Nobody can deny that. But my question is who did Abraham pray to? And the reason why is because Abraham in a monotheistic religion started around 2000 BC. Abraham is responsible for the monotheistic side of religion. Now, if we go back to 2000 BC, that's the same time around the conversion from the Sumerians to the Akkadian civilization. Okay, the Sumerians, like I said, are considered the first civilization because of their writing system. But I always tell people, just because I say that doesn't mean that they are the one. That's just what academia says. That's what, that's what the people with the PhDs say. They say, hey, this is the reason why. But to have a writing system, why would you have to have a writing system? Well, their writing system started because of trading. It didn't start because they was trying to tell stories that they had about these gods. It was about trading. So that means somebody else had to have a writing system around that same exact time. Two people, you can't trade without having two people understanding what they're trading. So they have to have some kind of way of recording their trade. So of course the Akkadians are there. So that means in reality, Abraham knew who the Anuna/the Anunnaki were. There's no doubt about it. He came up around that time frame, 2000 BC, give or take, at least I can say. So he knew which god, he knew about the Anunnaki gods, but he also wanted a son. And he's been praying to these gods, wanting a son. Okay. And he finally got one. But which one of those gods fulfilled his wish and his prayers? And that's what I'm trying to understand. And if he says that if he went to different temples, different religious site and said pray to different gods, let's say he went to Enki temple and prayed to God, and then let's say he went to the Enlil temple and prayed to the god, and then he went to Ninhursag temple, and then next thing you know, he has a son. Well, then he's going to say, well, Ninhursag was the one who helped me, the fertility god. But it doesn't necessarily say that in the Bible. It just says that he prayed to a god and eventually he got a son. So in reality, that would be his god of choice for prayers from that day on. And anytime that god would ask anything of him, he would do, because that God gave him something that he asked for. And we know that Abraham at one time was going to sacrifice his son Isaac, but that was a test to faith of, hey, look, I already gave you a son one time. If you sacrifice this child to me, testing the limits, of course, I can always give you another son. So that monotheistic religion started off of faith and prayer to a God that we don't absolutely know who he prayed to. We don't have the name. We don't have the depiction of that guy. We just know that Abraham wanted a child, a son, and then he was eventually given a child. And it's only right for him to worship that God. I prayed to every other God. They didn't help me. I went to this temple, prayed to this God, and the next thing you know, boom, my wife's pregnant.
Your book is has autobiographical section. It even opens up with your family being Catholic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Uh,
and that's where it started at with my religion of Catholicism.
so this has just been an interest in faith. Basically, as long as you can remember, is you've been a seeker.
That's so funny you say that, because when I first started this, when I first started this, I used to call myself seeker of knowledge, and it was because I always tried to seek the information out there. I always wanted to know what it was, not to be right or not to be wrong. I always tell people, for me, it's never about being right and wrong. It's about where I got my information from. If I read a certain book or a text or something like that, and that person is an expert in that field, you're not correcting me or telling me I'm wrong. You're telling me my source is wrong. But in order for me to believe that my source is wrong, you're going to have to give me a source that shows that I'm wrong and not just your word. And one thing that I grew up through this journey, and the reason why I call it Journey Through the Origins of History, is because it's my journey through the origins of history. What I've learned through my research, I have my own YouTube channel and website and all that stuff. I have on my website, I was talking to Barbara about this before. I have a section on my website of all the books that I've read personally at least 3 times. And you know, I have a X account, Twitter account, where I, share, things inside the book. And I even on my YouTube channel, I have a series called What I've Learned from Reading This Book, where I read the tabs that I marked on the book. And all I try to do is just share what I've personally read and what I've researched. And it's not because I want to be right. It's just because you hear people, and I used to say this all the time, go do your research, go do your research. Well,
Mhm.
to tell me to do my research is very disrespectful, because I really go do my own research and I show it. Everybody wants proof and evidence for everything. And
Right.
I obviously provide that proof and evidence, especially through my YouTube channel, what I've learned from reading this book. I go through every single book that I've read and I mark up the tablets. I actually have, this is the next book that I'm going over, called Cosmic Code from Zachariah Sitchin. You see all those tabs in there that I have?
Yep.
So all those tabs in there is something that I talk about on my YouTube channel. And then because I have a vast amount of knowledge, not just from this book, but from reading other books, I can add on to what that tab is in that book. So like when Zachariah Sitchin talks about planet Nibiru, I can say that there's actually no cuneiform tablet that says there's a planet Nibiru. But what I can tell you for a fact is Nibiru is also known as Nippur, which is a Mesopotamian city, which is a fact. And the evidence already shows that. There's art, depictions of Nippur. There's a city, and they have artifacts from that place. And they have cuneiforms that talk about Nippur being, Nibru or Nippuru is a Mesopotamian city. So I can show you that. Now, what I'm in search of right now is what cuneiform tablet says that there's a planet Nibiru, and did this, and how, and what cuneiform says that Sumerians knew more than 5 planets. Because from what I understand from individuals like Samuel Noah Kramer and Andrew George and George Smith, and even Dr. Michael S. Heiser, who also passed away, they say that the Sumerians only knew of 5 planets. And then later on, from the Chaldeans and the Babylonians and so on and so forth, that's when the knowledge of these more planets got basically exceeded the 5, and it was during different times. And it's just, for me, it's not about, like I always said, it's never about being right. I don't care about being right. All I want to know is what the other person knows. So that's where my research comes in. So when somebody says, hey, I read this book it talks about this, that, and the third. I'm going to go get that book and I'm going to try to find this, that, and the third in the book to see if I can make sense of what you're saying. And then I'll go talk about it and say, okay, this is what the facts are. If there is a planet Nibiru, we will know about it in the future, and we will have the scientific equipment to be able to prove that. Or one day somebody comes from outside of Earth's atmosphere and says, hey, we're from planet Nibiru, then that cuts all the other crap out the way. But right now, that's still a theory. But I don't have to work off of a theory. I can work off the facts that we have right now. And Nibiru/Nipper is a Mesopotamian city. So that's what I'm going to go with until I'm able to get the confirmation that there's an outside planet.
If there's a correlation, like, with Nibiru and Nipper, a earthbound city, is there some kind of symbolic connection, like Rome is compared to Babylon? Is there something like that going on in the Sumerian texts?
Yeah, so that's interesting you asked that, because a lot of people,
It's interesting.
It is. A lot of people would say, they combine everything in Mesopotamia to be the Sumerians, which is not true. The Sumerians believed in different things than the Akkadians. Not that much. As much as similarities that you'll find between these cities in Mesopotamia, you'll find a lot more differences. They had a lot of similarities, but they also had a lot of differences. And I'll give you a perfect example of this. When I was talking about Enlil and Enki, most people know them as brothers. Most people will say, yeah, Enlil and Enki are brothers. But then when you go to the electronic text corpus of Sumerian literature, which is available online, or if you read the book, The Literature of Ancient Sumer, which is the same exact thing as the website, it's just the book format, you will read that they weren't always brothers, but one was the father and one was the son. And I learned this from Anton Parks, actually, from the book Eden, where he gives the actual cuneiform tablet identifiers that actually back up what he says. And to know that Enlil and Enki, one or the other, could be a father to the other one, it struck my curiosity, because you don't hear that from too many people. Everybody is the basic understanding that Enlil and Enki are brothers, and that's fine. But then when you go do your deep dives and you read the actual text and you see different wordings that Enki could have been the father or Enlil could have been the father, it brings to my attention that, okay, what do they mean by that? Right? Like, why? Okay, I know that, and this is the interesting thing that I learned about the word brothers. In Sumerian, they were considered the black-headed people, where the word for it is Sagiga, Saggiga, if I'm not mistaken the spelling. That was basically their way of saying black-headed people. Well, just like how Adam is known as a man, he's also known as mankind. The word is also known as humans. This is no different than the word for Saggiga, is that it's they could also mean brothers, which is very interesting. And I learned that from Samuel Noah Kramer, that it wasn't just black-headed people, that it was humans or mankind, or sometimes they were known as brothers. So that's where it came into me. Okay, why is there so many different changes in their writing system? And then that's when I started thinking, this is the early stages of writing. These people even today, some people don't even know the difference between your and your. YOURE and then YOUR, right? Like, people don't know, or they or their.
Yeah.
and people don't know the difference. So, and that's just basic English, right? So if we having trouble with people deciding the difference in that just in 2025, think about how bad the language and the writing system was in the beginning stages when they were trying to get people to understand. Most of the cuneiform tablets that they found weren't found in households of people. They were found in schools, in small locations of people learning how to, write cuneiform. Matter of fact, they used to have, and this is from what Samuel Noah Kramer says in his books, they used to have a school, and their school was called Edubba, Edubba. That's their name for their school. And they would teach people, mostly boy kids, how to write. And they would have to write the same tablet over and over and over and over again until they got it right. But they never threw away. Okay, I'm not going to say they never threw away the tablets. They never destroyed these tablets to the point where they said, okay, this is wrong. If you got an F on your paper, the teacher would tear it up and throw it in the trash and tell you to do it again. Well, they couldn't tear up cuneiform tablets, and I don't think they had anybody that would break them and deteriorate them because they used them as a grading and as a training tool. So they kept them, and you can tell that from just the little, I guess you can say, because tablets weren't that big. A lot of people think they were big, but they were smaller than something like this. They were really small. I got to see some of these up close in person. They're not big tablets. You know what I mean? They're not like here, I got a Kindle right here. They weren't the size of this. they weren't the size of those. They were very, 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 very small things. So it could have been easy for somebody to mess up. And once you press on that clay tablet, that's pretty much a done deal unless you want to go back and start all over again, right? I mean, look at the books. Every book that I've read, even I'm sure my book probably has some grammatical error somewhere, everywhere. I read books from Oxford University that has grammatical errors in there. It's just something that happens because we're human, right? No book is going to be 100% perfect. So that and we're doing that in 2025 when you have people who are using things like Grammarly to help them write books, so you can skip the editing process.
Beta readers.
Yeah, ChatGPT is even a good tool to, you can copy your paragraph, highlight it, and say, hey, fix all my grammatical errors in here, and it would do it. Does that mean that you cheated or did something? No, you just cut out the middleman of editors. That's it.
I've done that numerous times. Is let an author know. It's Barbara and I deal with them all the time, and just send an email to the author and say, hey, check these pages, and most of the time they will say, I have read this book so many times, I can't even see that I've misspelled some of these words. This should be 2 sentences instead of a colon there. I get that, and they're very appreciative that you've helped to eliminate more mistakes. They want it to be done correctly. Barbara and I've done that with several authors, and they say, well, thank you very much for letting me know. I will contact the editor or the publisher and ask them to make these corrections.
Yeah,
it happens.
And like I said, when I was talking about the 1%, you're always going to have a 1% error in a book.
Yeah.
And this happens in 2025, even with all the technology that we have that should be able to catch those, right? Human eyes and the computer, right? Spell check, for instance. I mean, before we had ChatGPT and Grammarly, we had spell check on Microsoft Word. That's the same exact thing. It wasn't as advanced as it is now, but when it first started, of course, it helped you. If you didn't put a comma in a certain place, it would tell you to put a comma here. If you misspelled a word, it would help you fix a word. It wouldn't necessarily put it into, a sentence that was complete. If you had an incomplete sentence, it would keep it incomplete. But now you can ask Grammarly to help you. I mean, Grammarly, I use Grammarly for a lot of my writing because I don't talk like I write. Nobody talks like they write. I haven't met anybody that talks like they write. And so, we have to use these tools to help us. And they didn't have those tools back then. They had the person who was recording, which was the child or the trader or whoever.
Mhm.
And then you had the person who would read it. And it took a lot of time and money and effort to create a tablet. You had to do it right. It wasn't, I always used to think about this when it came to me studying writing systems. I can write in English pretty fast, but when you look at languages like the Japanese writing system or the Chinese writing system, where they have multiple things going on, when you was back in school, your teacher would say, copy these notes real fast. And you had to copy these notes and you had to,
Right.
shorthand some stuff and take out some words and stuff like that. And you had to write it really fast. How can you do that in different languages that have like you're almost drawing?
No, it's a complicated pictograph, like you mentioned earlier in the show.
Yeah.
It's a writing system we aren't used to, but from what I understand, it is very complicated.
Yeah. So that's what, knowing that when they did these recordings and these people were trying to, share what they could through their writing system, anybody could have made a mistake to where they got something wrong here and there, and that's fine. That's okay. Like I said, if there is a planet Nibiru out there, eventually we're going to know one way or another.
Okay, and um, you also get into was it 23andMe?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I found that the same thing while I was writing about history, and it kind of seems pretty common that you're writing about maybe something long ago, but somehow you're working parts of yourself into your writing project. So there are aspects of autobiography and
Mm-hmm.
autobiography incorporated. So what were you intending to achieve by working in your heritage with this look at the Mediterranean, Near East, Mesopotamian cultures?
Yeah. So I wanted to make sure that people understood that I don't have a dog in this fight, because I do talk about sensitive subjects like genetic mutation, SLC 2485, which is actually considered the white gene. I wanted to let everybody know that I don't have a dog in this fight. My mother's white, my father's African American. I can't choose one over the other because that would be stupid of me, right? So I wanted people to know that I don't have a dog in this fight. But then I also wanted people to know that I'm not just, African American and German, but I also have different things like Japanese in me. I have Italian in me. I have French in me. I have Egyptian, Iranian, some Mesopotamian, and so on and so forth. I have different things in there. So I wanted to learn about every part of me that I could possibly learn about and bring it to people to say, hey, look, this is why I'm telling you these things, because this is who I am. I'm a mixture of so many different things.
It's a part of
And
you.
yeah, it's a part of me. And I don't want people to think that when I talk about a subject that I'm saying that these people are greater than the next. Because in reality, when you read the Bible, God had a chosen people. We don't know who those chosen people were exactly. I mean, we know that they were Israelites and so on and so forth, but we don't necessarily know who they were, what color their skin was, or anything. But then you also have to understand that why did he choose these people? Was it because he felt like these were people that were smarter? No, he doesn't say that. Were they stronger? No, he doesn't say that. Maybe it's because he wanted to choose these people to carry on the responsibility of what he believed, right? There's so many different theories, but the reason why I put that in my book mainly was just to show people that this history that I'm talking about in my book is all about what is within me in myself. I wanted to know who I was. When I found out I had Iranian in me, I had to learn about the Persians. When I learned out that I had Egyptians in me, Egyptian blood in me, I wanted to understand what the Egyptians were. My father used to always tell me when I was young that that we had Native American blood. When I did that 23andMe, we didn't have any Native American blood in me. So he was going around telling me for 30 something years, and people were believing in our family that we have Native American in us, and we don't. Not even a matter of fact, I think, and I'm not sure because he never did the 23andMe, but um, on the male side of the DNA and haplogroups and stuff, uh, I think we come from France, and or I can't remember exactly where, but King Louis the 16th, I believe, we're related to on the male side, and that can only come from the male side. So that tells me that my father had some European in him, even though he was African American. He we know about the slave trade and stuff like that, but the point is that he had European in him, and that I would have never known about being related to King Louis the 16th, or I can't remember exactly which one. I would have never learned about that from him. If I'd have never did my 23, I'd have probably told my kids that we had Native American in us, and that's not true. So I wanted to make sure that I talked about only what I was, what my bloodline was, because everybody wants to know who they are, and everybody wants to know where they came from, so on and so forth. And I want to make sure that my kids know who they are and where they came from. But I also don't want to have a dog in the fight on, who's the chosen people. You know what I mean? I'd never wanted to do that. And I always talk about one of the things that I want to do in my second book, if I write it, is, just talk about, you know, more in depth stuff like the into Africa theory and out of Africa theory. You know, why is it only considered that they say all humans came from Africa when we have South America, which is literally on the same line as Africa, or in the same realm of Africa, that could inhabit a group of individuals. It's just amazing to me that some people have a one-sided mindset and don't want to think outside of the box, and don't want to understand that there's more to the story than what we are being told. And because science hasn't really caught up with our theories and ideas, we are still led to believe a certain thing in history. And I don't believe a certain thing in history, because sometimes when things don't add up, you have to help it add up in a way.
Okay. And speaking of things that don't add up for the mainstream scientists, but I think the nightlight viewers do really find the topic very intriguing. Is you talk a little bit about the giants and little people, okay, you can stick with the Phoenicians and Goliath as well. Okay, so there's another example of something really unusual being presented in the Bible, but um, uh, earlier archaeologists do document uh, giant people. So, what's your
Yeah.
interest there with?
Yeah, so I've read so many different texts about giants from all around the world. And one thing that I try to understand, or what I wanted to understand on the basic level, what can I show right now is who are the tallest people on planet Earth right now? Well, there's an argument on that, but for the most part, from what I understand, that there are a group of people from Sudan who are considered, uh, you know, the tallest people in the world. And then you have the pygmy people who are considered the shortest people in the world. And they both come from Africa, of course, which is interesting because the idea that the Bible started around, Ethiopia or Mesopotamia is an argument. The Bible just means books, basically. So it's just a combination of different books from different places. But I wanted to know who were the tallest people. And I can't remember, there's a place in Europe, and I can't remember the argument for that place. I forgot it off the top of my head. But what I wanted to know was, okay, when it comes to the Bible, when you mentioned Goliath, I've read in the Bible that when you read the Bible, he was 6 cubits in the span. That's what it says in the King James Version, 6 cubits in the span. That can be anywhere from 6 to 9 feet tall. Is that really tall? In the essence of giants considered in the book of Enoch? No, because in the book of Enoch, they're considered and described as being as tall as buildings, basically. But when you read the Bible, it says 6 cubits in the span. But when you read the Greek Septuagint, it says 4 cubits in the span. So it's 2 cubit spans shorter. And that can be anywhere from 5 to 8 feet, possibly, right? But what we do know is pygmy people are very, very short, very, very short. And when I learned about pygmy people, I learned more about them from Godfrey Higgins. So Godfrey Higgins wrote these books in 1833, and he was a Mason. He was a British guy, and he was a very, very intelligent individual. He's a historian. He's one of my favorite authors out there, actually. And he wrote about the pygmy people coming from Africa. And these were the same people that were described as leprechauns in Ireland, which is amazing. And he talks about it in depth to the point where he says that the stories of these pygmy people, that they had magical abilities, same type that you can find in Egypt. Ptah, he was actually a pygmy, depicted as a pygmy individual at one time in his early stages rather than in his later stages. And what I learned is that these individuals can be anywhere from like 3 to 4 feet tall, very, very short individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take somebody who's 3 to 4 feet tall versus somebody who is, we'll go with the highest number, 9 feet tall, that's a significant difference, right? So that person that's 9 feet tall would be considered giant. But if we go with the smaller route of 7 feet, 6 feet, that still would be tall. And when I looked up the etymology of giant, it was just basically somebody who was strong, tall, had muscles and power and so on and so forth, but they never describe how tall they would be. So it was just amazing to me that we have stories of, people who are tall and strong and powerful and had authority. Then and we had people who were short. And I'll give you a good example of that. Gilgamesh was considered a giant in some aspects and depictions because he would have lions under his arms, like he's carrying them like regular old cats, right?
Okay, you'd have to be, big stature to do that. So, okay, I agree with you.
Yeah. So like when I was talking about earlier about depictions, if we went to a museum and we looked at a fine art, we would have the basic understanding that we're looking at a giant. But what does that really represent? You know, a lot of people say that Gilgamesh was tall and he was a giant because he held up those lions. But could that just mean that he was an authority and a powerful figure, that he could tame these lions? And that's how, you know, he was depicted. And I found out that in reality, if you look at some of the older depictions of Gilgamesh, they were all the same height. They weren't he wasn't this big old individual. They were looked more like growing lions or whatever. And depending on where you were in the world, like in Mesoamerica, they had gods that would have the animals that was in their areas. I can't remember if it was like what pumas or cougars or jaguars or something like that, but they would have depictions of, you know, somebody holding these. And that could just mean to me in representation that these people were in power and authority. So was the giant really tall and strong and powerful? Maybe, possibly, but could they also have just been somebody that was in more control, power, and authority, and had, you know, that power and authority over other people? Then yes, that could be it, because that's what a giant was. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody that's 6, 7, 8 feet tall. Just somebody that could be a couple of inches taller than you. You know, I'm 5'8". If somebody was 6 feet, I wouldn't call that person a giant. But if we use the words of power and authority and stuff like that, then yeah, then in some ways you can.
Okay, that's a good point. I think illustrated that very very well. Okay, you also get into the South American pyramids uh, that came began about 2600 BC, but you know that's following the fluorescence of the Sumerian culture about 3200 BC. So you know you're you know, giving people time to relocate, get reestablished, find a place to uh, do their engineering work. So are you saying that the South American pyramids are an extension of the Sumerian culture or Near East
Yeah,
countries?
absolutely. Because okay, so the Sumerians are, like I said, I say it over, they're considered the first civilization because of their writing system. But they also have what's called ziggurats, right? And that's
Hmm.
like almost like a pyramid, right?
Right.
And we know that masons are individuals who can work with stone and stuff like that, and that they were in charge of, you know, certain things. But I look at it like when I was talking about expertise, where did these masons or people with expertise come from? Right? Somebody had to come, it had to come from somewhere. And because the Sumerians are considered the first civilization, you see the idea that the ziggurats are considered some of the oldest out there, depending on how you want to look at it. A lot of people would say that the pyramids in Egypt are the oldest pyramids in the world. That's not necessarily true. They have pyramids in Bosnia that they haven't really dug into, and they don't know how old they are. They have pyramids in China. Same thing. They haven't really dug and did any archaeology digs on there. But then you have what are called mounds, which is basically the archaic version without the stones and stuff like that of the pyramids, and these go back thousands of years. So my idea is that not necessarily, you know, Mesoamerica having a relationship with the Sumerians, but what the Sumerians passed in their time frame extended to different places. There are pyramids in Peru that are older than Egypt. And some people would date these pyramids from anywhere from 2700 BC to anywhere over 12,000 years ago, right? But the point is that the pyramids in Egypt are not the oldest. They're the most recognized and seeked after type of pyramids, and they're not even the most aesthetically pleasing pyramids either, right? You go to, I've never been to Mexico or Mesoamerica, but I definitely if I go to any pyramids, I want to go to those pyramids first, because I want to see the aesthetic of how they brought not just stone together, but they brought art with that stone. Egypt doesn't really have art, right? It's just, in reality, it's just big stones inside it and stones around it. But in different places like Mesoamerica, they have aesthetically pleasing pyramids, steps.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when the sun hits it the right certain way, you can see a snake going up or down the steps on the side. They say when you clap a certain distance from the pyramids, it makes a sound that is so pleasing to the ears, it could put you in a meditative state. There's so many different things that these pyramids have, but it had to come from somewhere, right? And because the Sumerians are considered the first because of their advanced writing system, and I should say that more often, their advanced writing system, a lot of the information recording with math and how to do things came from there. We have a lot of pyramids lined up with different constellations around the world, and they line up with different parts of what's in the sky. And we know that in the Babylonian Chaldean time frame, Chaldeans were actually considered the first astronomers. And that's actually interesting because, like I said earlier, the Sumerians only knew of 5 planets. It wasn't until like the Babylonians and Chaldeans when you get the more advanced astronomy and all this other stuff. But this is what the kicker is. I have an 1873 Bible that actually says in there that the Chaldeans, Babylonians, and Sumerians were all one and the same. Now, this comes from an 1873 Bible. And when we call somebody the Sumerians or the Chaldeans and the Babylonians, we're just changing the name of the individuals and not their culture, because their culture is still living on. Even today, people still, like I said, people are still living like they did back thousands and thousands of years ago. They just adapted to the technology that we have today. They don't no longer have to create butter from, skin from animals and stuff like that, right? Like they don't have to have it sitting outside in the heat and create a certain type of butter and stuff like that, or milk or anything like that. Like they don't have to create, they don't have to live that old lifestyle. They can go into the city and get them some butter from wherever and stuff like that. Like they had grocery stores when I was there. Like I walked into a grocery store and I almost damn near thought it was Walmart.
Oh, well, that's unexpected.
Yeah.
Okay. So, okay. We're, we still have, do you want to kind of wind things down, keep going for 28 minutes and a few seconds?
It's fine with me. I told you on the phone that, we probably won't get through half of this because it's a lot of explanations and a lot of stuff. I always say this, it's very important to do your own research, but you have to put your beliefs and feelings to the side. You can't go looking for something that you agree with or you want to agree with, right? And what I mean by that is if you believe in one God, you can't go looking for text that says, oh, see, they're talking about one God here. Because when you go to the next text and you read that they're talking about multiple gods, you ignore that. You're only doing yourself disservice. You have to really put your feelings and pride to the side when you want to know the truth, right? Because the truth is hard to swallow. It's a hard pill to swallow. I used to believe in God, in one God, I used to believe that, but then when I was in public schools and met different friends and different people from around the world, they had a different description and understanding of a God that I knew from the Catholic side. So it's just important to really put your feelings to the side and just say, okay, hey, look, you want to know the truth? Okay, this is what the truth is. And just like they say, believe with the lie in the middle. Believe everything, but there's a lie somewhere in that middle.
Okay, so a lot of what you're saying is that, just with all the people you've met from around the world, to summarize what they are saying is, we're all, trying to get to the same place, just maybe taking different roads.
Yeah. And some of them are more windy than others, and some of them are not paved, and some of them are bumpy, and that's fine. But
A lot
as
of
long as,
potholes.
yeah, a lot of potholes, right? And changing out tires and all kinds of stuff. Yeah, the more I read, the more confused I get. And the only reason why is because it's always adding to my confusion. I know that there are multiple gods, and I will never get the answer which God Abraham prayed to, unless there's a cuneiform tablet that says it. Then yeah, of course I'll get it. And until then, I will only be able to assume based off the knowledge that I have on hand. And I take my knowledge from people who say they are experts in the field. So it's not me sharing what I think is the facts. I'm sharing what Samuel Noah Kramer says, what Andrew George says, what George Smith says, what Zachariah Sitchin says, what Dr. Michael S. Heiser says, what Jim Willis says, what it's from everybody's perspective I'm sharing. And all I try to do is try to make sense of it. So when somebody says, hey, there's a planet Nibiru out there, I want to say, well, what cuneiform tablet says there's a planet Nibiru? And when they say go do your own research, that lets me know that they know that there's not one out there. Because telling somebody to do their own research and you can give them the information to continue their research, like a book or a peer-reviewed article or a magazine or something, then you're helping that person. Because think of it like this: we all do our own research, right? Every one of us does our own research. And in reality, if we all do our own research, everything that we say comes from our own individual research. So what your research led you to is what you're going to share. Now, if I have a piece of information that can help you, you would be glad to take it. Just like the same thing for me. If I have some information, if I needed some more information and you have it and you give it to me, I need to take that information and I need to, apply it to what I already know. I don't have to change what I believe, which I should if it helps me with my journey, but I don't have to change it. But that means that I only want to be ignorant then. Because then when somebody gives me information and I don't take it and do my own due diligence behind it, then I'm just going to stay ignorant and I will pass that same information on. And that's how the circle of misinformation keeps happening, is the ignorance within ourselves. And I'm still like that sometimes, because sometimes I don't want to believe certain things. And because I haven't found something that, goes against what you say or what I say or what anybody else says, I'm ignorant to the point where I'm not searching for more information. Once you stop, see, this whole journey of gaining knowledge doesn't stop when you feel good. It stops when you're no longer breathing. And even then, you might not even get all the information you want. That's why a lot of people spend hours and hours of research, is because it takes a lot of time. Like there's no one person in this world can read every single book. There are millions of books out there. I don't care how many books you've read, nobody has read enough to get from that tip of the iceberg. You only see the tip of the iceberg, but everything underneath that water is a whole grand of knowledge out there. And we would never get that. Not in one lifetime. Nobody would have that opportunity. Now, maybe in the future with this Neuralink and, you know, all this other stuff that everybody's trying to create to, you know, better ourselves, maybe we'll be able to download the book, and it rather read taking 6 to 8 hours to read a book, you can download that information in your brain and you got it within 5 minutes. Now that might be something, but even then you still can't do 1,000,000 books a day. There's no way. There's no way. You know?
So,
There's no way.
sometimes just a book a week to prep for a show is too much.
Yeah, it really is. You know, I try to depending on the size of the book and the amount of information in the book, I might be able to read 4 or 5 books a week, maybe
Wow.
6. But I also have to read them 3 times. So depending on the size, like I said, it all depends. Like if I have a 700-800 page book, I'm definitely not going to read that in one day. You know, that's probably it'd take me maybe a week or 2, only because there's so much information. I don't just read a book. I try to understand it. Those
And you
tabs that I
put up,
have,
yeah, I was just gonna say that the tabs.
yeah, those tabs, I when I'm done reading the book, I go back and I go research those tabs. And then I go read the book again. Then I go research those, then I research the new tabs because I marked those tabs that I have. I know which ones that I've marked and what I've already didn't. Then I do it a 3rd time. That takes a lot of time. So when I hear people say, I've read thousands and thousands of books, I'm only asking them, do you understand what you've read? Because there's been plenty of times, and I guarantee you, we all can say this. We read a book and we forgot what we read. So you got to go back and read it again. And then you got to go back and read it again because you get sidetracked. It's the same thing with watching movies. That's why they have rewind. So you can go back and rewind what you've seen and be like, oh, okay, you know. And then sometimes you fall asleep in the middle of reading books. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I fell asleep reading a book and forgot what page I was on, and then, you know, I was like, dang, I've read this already. I don't remember reading this. And then when you get to a certain part, you be like, I did read all this already. And then you then you're like, oh my God, how did I miss this? And I'm telling you, you miss a lot. That's why, you know, nobody, I haven't read, anybody that has a favorite movie hasn't watched that movie just one time. They watched it
Right.
multiple times and they found something new in that movie over and over again. You know, I watch The Simpsons a lot, and I can't tell you how many times I find new things in The Simpsons all the time. And I've been watching this since the 80s. You know, every episode. I'm a big fan of The Simpsons. So it's the same thing with books, is that you can't just read a book one time and say, hey, I got it all. I mean, you can get the basic understanding, but if you really, really, really trying to understand that book, you've got to read it multiple times. You
Right.
have to.
You know what? Let's see. You know, you also get. You know, this topic would interest a lot of the nightlight viewers. Is you know you know, you do get into UFOs and the paranormal,
Mhm.
a little bit of ghost, supernatural kind of stuff. Uh, you have a lot of you know, real history, you know, just very provable history, but yeah, the other stuff might be, uh, you know, the paranormal stuff might be a little more open to interpretation for uh you know, a lot
Mhm.
of our viewers. But what approach are you taking with those topics and incorporating in with all the, you know, well documented history and science that you cover?
That's a good question. Okay, so like I'll go with the vampires because we're talking about
Okay.
paranormal and stuff like that. Um,
Well, it's just right
the
after Halloween too.
Yeah, exactly. You know, the first representation of a vampire is considered Lilith. And this is according to Samuel Noah Kramer. I can't remember which exact book it was that he talked about it. I did a series I did it on my YouTube. What I've learned from reading this book. One of his books, he actually uses the word vampire, and is he says that Lilith was considered a vampire, but it's not the vampire in that sense of, like the movie Blade, they're sucking on your neck and all this other stuff. It's more of like an energy draining type of thing. I'm pretty sure you heard of energy. What is it? I can't remember the term for the vampires. But anyway,
there's the energy vampire.
Yeah, I think that's what I was trying to get to. I think that's what they call it, energy vampires, where they drain your energy. Is Lilith was considered the first in vampire according to the Sumerians, according to what Samuel Noah Kramer translated, and he actually uses the word vampire in his book. So, and they say that she was a vampire because of the simple fact that she was in a tree, and she was, she was, just basic. I don't even know how to explain it in a sense to make sense, because Samuel Noah Kramer says basically that she was in a tree and that Gilgamesh needed to was asked to get it out, and this, that, and the third, and all this other stuff. But when I learned about Lilith, because of that, from Samuel Noah Kramer being the idea of a vampire, that's when I realized that she was also named as Lilitu, and it's Lilitu, if I'm not spelling it miscorrectly. That was that was the Sumerian way of describing Lilith. Now, Lilith in the Abrahamic faith, the monotheistic religion, she's not mentioned as far as in the Bible, but most people know her as Adam's first wife, and then it was Eve the second, and it was because she didn't want to be submissive to Adam. Basically, she didn't want to be underneath him. However way you want to look at that, she wanted to be as equal to him or greater to him, depending on the text. And because it was draining Adam's energy, some people would consider her an energy vampire. Now, there's a whole misconception of what vampires are. A lot of people, like I said, think of the idea of sucking on your blood, but what our energy, our essence, our life comes from blood. When our blood comes out our body, when it's drained from our body, our energy starts to dwell. When you're bleeding profusely, your energy dwells. It's not there anymore. The blood is our life. It keeps us going. It gives us the ability to continue to move on. Yes, food is a source of energy, but you can't live 5 minutes without blood. You can live 5 minutes without food. You can live 5 minutes without water, right? But you can't live 5 minutes without blood. So the depiction of something taking your blood away or your energy away would be depicted as something sucking the blood out of your body. And that's the depiction that I get from, that side. And that's when I didn't talk about too much about vampires or anything like that in my book or anything, but that's just an example of why I brought up paranormal stuff, because each ancient civilization, religion, mythology, or whatever you want to call it, they have these stories of vampires, ghosts, demons, devils and angels, and all the Bigfoot, for example, because I talk about Enkidu. Enkidu was Gilgamesh's best friend, but he didn't start off as a best friend. Gilgamesh was a tyrant. He wasn't somebody to be looked up to. What's one of the craziest stories that I know about Gilgamesh, and it's in all the ancient texts, is that in his city, if you was a man who was getting married to a woman, before you could have relationship with your wife, Gilgamesh had to have a relationship with her first, which is crazy, right? And people hated that. Men hated that, right? Because it's supposed to be a sacred bond between a man and a woman. But Gilgamesh was the one, who, took that away from and I'm trying to keep it basically very clean as I possibly can. He took that away from other men. And, these individuals looked for somebody else to help them. And the closest individual that could help them do that was Enkidu. But Enkidu lived in the woods with animals. And he was considered an animal until these individuals sent a prostitute to convince him to come to the city. And that prostitute basically taught him how to be more human. And then eventually Gilgamesh and him became friends. They got into a fight, and I guess I don't know what, if Gilgamesh changed his ways after that. But then when, Enkidu would go back into the woods with the animals, they turned their back on him because he was no longer like them, but he was more like human. But Gilgamesh, Enkidu was, depicted as sometimes an individual with horns, sometimes with bull-like legs to depict that he was half human, half animal. And he was also depicted as sometimes with individuals or an individual with long hair of some sort. Well, Bigfoot would be the closest thing to that. And I believe that in the Sumerian text, Enkidu was considered the first Bigfoot. We don't know what Bigfoot looks today. We have the famous, video of a Bigfoot from what I think 1967 or something like that. If I'm not mistaken.
Patterson Gimlin film.
Yeah. So we have that, but we don't know if that was a genetic mutation, right? We just have we really don't know. And in reality, you can find people, humans today, right now, who have long hair like that, who are covered like that in hair. There are actually people who are considered like what they call wolfmen because they have
it's a genetic condition.
Yeah, so that's why I say, Enkidu could have possibly been the first representation of a Bigfoot, right? What is really Bigfoot? He has big feet, and we know that he's hairy. Well, Enkidu is supposed to be the same size of Gilgamesh, and he had long hair like tresses. Depending on what you describe tresses, that could be, long hair from, how me and your hair is, or hair all over our body, so it's just, I put that in there and I explain it very well to the point where people understand that, if you read the text about Enkidu, you will see that he could have been described as half animal like, half human like.
Okay, and we have about 9 minutes left. I was trying to find a passage. You're right. Myths serve as methods for transmitting a society's collective identity. They are imbued with the moral lessons, social norms, and spiritual beliefs that define a culture. Okay, you were just talking about, vampires, draining your blood, or Enkidu is, the first depiction of Bigfoot. We've covered all kinds of other examples this evening, but how do all these, a little bit, weirder kind of characters, tell us about, the social structure in, Mesopotamia. Have things even, really changed thousands of years later, and we're still talking about, Bigfoot hunters on late night podcasts?
That's very, very interesting because when it comes to Bigfoot, a lot of people will say that when they seen one, they seen orbs, right?
Mhm.
UFOs, basically, unidentified flying objects. And that's why that's one of the reasons why they changed the name from, or the acronym from, UFOs to UAPs. You know, all this paranormal stuff hasn't changed. It's just we are right now at a point where we can have a conversation and we can understand each other much better than they did in the past. What I mean by that is that when I'm not a rich man, so if I hung out with rich people and I spoke the way I speak to you, they would look at me like some underclass person, because there's a proper English and then there's slang English. This is no different than any language on this planet. You have proper language and then you have, slang language. And most of us speak slang. Not, it doesn't have to be hip hop or country slang or anything like that. It's just slang, period. The word ain't. I remember growing up hearing that the word ain't is not a word, and it's not in the dictionary. Well, now it is in the dictionary, you know,
Or
and
crick.
yeah, exactly. So
There is no water
we
feature called a crick.
so that's my point, is that we know that we make words for our understandings, but it's two people have to understand those words. If I go to somebody and say that ain't true, they'll be like, okay, I understand what you're saying. I go to some rich people who are speaking proper English, they'll look at me like I'm crazy, right? Because that's not in their vocabulary. They'll be like, ain't, what is that? And this is no different than that time frame. And that's why I said that it's important to understand that, you know, we tell stories based off our own experiences. I can't tell anybody else what they've experienced. I can only tell you what I've experienced, and we can only compare what we experienced. Now, when we talk about what a group of people like the Sumerians said, we can all go whatever route we want to, but you have to prove where you got that information from. And
Mhm.
that's anything like with paranormal, when we're talking about ghosts. When I said Enkidu might have been the Bigfoot, I'm using depictions of him being half human, half animal. Like, I'm reading, the text saying that he was with the animals at one time, and then when he came back, when he left to go to the city and came back, he was no longer like them, and they turned their back on him. So, this it's just so many different ways to take things, and we have to take it almost like with a grain of salt. I mean, there's not just one Bible out there. You have the King James version with the Protestant Bible of 66 books, and then you have the Ethiopian Bible. Then you have the Popol Vuh, which is considered a Bible from the Mesoamericans. And then you have, like I said, the Bible is just considered books, and a library is considered books. So when you can pick up a Bible and say you have a library in your hand, because that's literally just a place of books. You put one book in your library, and that one book can be considered a library because it's made of many books.
Yeah, hey, Tyrone, I think we're down to about 3 minutes. You want to plug your website, and we'll call it a night. Where do people get uh, journey through the origin of history? And want to thank you for being a guest, and the viewers for tuning in.
Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate it. So everything that anybody can find on me is on my website, rebirthoftheword.com. Everything from all my social media accounts to where you can buy my book from, and just articles and videos of everything that I've done is literally on my website, rebirthoftheword.com.
All right. So, okay, we're we're about 2 minutes left, and we better wrap there so we don't go over the 2 hour limit. We'll get lots of great shorts out of this one. Thank you, Tyrone, for being a very thought-provoking guest. We'll have to do this again sometime soon. And I just want to thank Barbara for producing the show, keeping us on the air, and everyone for tuning in to tonight's thought-provoking show. Thank you so much. We'll see you sometime soon.